March of 2022 saw the resumption of two large-scale in-person conferences, one an inaugural event and the other a long-standing conference and exhibition that's been hosted for decades. Of course, I'm talking about ViVE and HIMSS. I'm your host, Carol Flagg, and on this special two-part episode, I chat once again with my good friends James Aita, the Director of Strategy and Business Development for Medicomp Systems, and Grace Vinton, a seasoned PR expert at Amendola Communications. The three of us turn our attention to HIMSS, which just concluded in Orlando, and ask again, is there room in our industry for two large-scale health IT conferences? Take a listen. Well, James, Grace, welcome back to What's My Tagline. I kind of feel like we should have like a regular standing gig since we actually did an episode around and at ViVE, and now we're going to be talking about HIMSS.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we love that.
Yeah, it's like the band's back together. quite the trio. So obviously we're here to talk about HIMSS. Full disclosure, you obviously, for listeners, I was not at HIMSS, but you two were. So before we talk about the second conference in Florida in a 2-week period, of course, we're on What's My Tagline, and I would like to know for this special episode, if you had to describe yourself as a HIMSS tagline, what would it be? Grace, ladies first.
Love it. So mine would be empowering the patient perspective in healthcare innovation.
Okay, that sounds sort of right up the digital health HIMSS alley. And James, how about you?
So mine, I'm sticking with the data side, and I'm going to make data actionable because, data was still first and foremost in everyone's mind at HIMSS this year.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, the data point and then the innovation point that you're making, Grace. Those are obviously common themes to both of these large scale digital health events, right? It's a conversation that's been going on for years in the industry, but obviously as we come back together, somewhat of a post-COVID world, I guess, for these in-person events, I think this issue about data and where we're going with that and innovation and strides in the industry the last couple of years, really because of this pandemic, are really, I think, hand in hand, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're seeing really the patient perspective being included more and more, even so too, in this. And let's not forget, data really is a patient. That's the patient information. That's all of that information that is used to help improve outcomes and improve the patient experience at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I expected to see, I think, a lot less activity at HIMSS in terms of just the sheer size and number of people there and new entrants into the industry. But it was amazing to me how many new companies are popping up, both at ViVE, but also at HIMSS with huge booths that we're all talking about data, what we're going to do with the data, how to get the data, how to move the data from one place to another. But I still haven't seen a lot of people talking about what do you do with the data once you get it? How do you make it usable? How do you make it actionable either to the clinician or to the patient or to any other actor in the industry? And so, that piece to me, I think, is the piece that we as an industry need to be thinking through a little bit more and finding and making the solutions to do that.
Yeah, and we're gonna harken back to what you're saying, because obviously there are some large initiatives and pieces of legislation that are driving this, extreme focus right now on data. Of course, there's the Cures Act driving interoperability, and now TEFCA, everybody's favorite new acronym. But TEFCA. But
gotta have a new acronym, right? Exactly. We always need a new acronym every year.
Exactly. But that's sort of my segue into my question, since I wasn't there and sort of following along in social media, is we had the vibe at ViVE. What was the hype at HIMSS?
What's so interesting is that I thought that ViVE was fostering the excitement and energy in the industry. But in many ways, the energy is just there no matter where you are. I mean, ViVE did a fantastic job bringing people together, really, encouraging insightful partnerships and conversations. But HIMSS did as well. And it was about 4 times the size, which it's hard to really keep that, level of energy among, an entire group of people like that. But there was an excitement about just being together for the first time after the pandemic, really in such a large way. And then also all of this, digital health funding dollars coming in and making all these hopes the industry has had for so long a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ViVE was able to tie it together maybe a little bit more, but certainly, I saw a bunch of different numbers being thrown around for the number of people that were at HIMSS. It was probably, one person said 22,000. Someone who works at HIMSS said 26,000. Either way, it was much, much bigger, and the energy really was, still there. And it is all about, figuring out these these big issues. Data being, I think, the one that's at the top of everyone's mind right now is we got to move this stuff now. We have to. If not, we're gonna get hit with the stick. So let's figure it out. And there's so much money being poured into this industry, poured into new companies who all think that they're going to figure it out right now. Maybe some of them will, but certainly the big vendors are taking notice as well.
So I just sort of stepping back here, because, the 3 of us have been attending HIMSS for a number of years and obviously involved in what's been going on in the industry just from a pure legislation standpoint. And then, of course, ViVE comes along, which is this combination of health plus Chime. Now, of course, Chime used it for 25 years, I think, did their CIO forum ahead of the HIMSS conference, and all that kind of changed this year with their partnership with Health, HLTH event. And so we had we've had this sort of hyper-focused, right, attention for 2 weeks in a row. But just from the basic differences, James, I kind of agree that the 6,000, 7,000 people at ViVE sort of whetted this appetite and excitement that was sustained through HIMSS. But from a basic difference standpoint, what we talked about on our segment at ViVE was, and did you see sort of a different kind of attendance? Yes, it was 3 or 4 times larger at HIMSS, but did you see more frontline people, like a traditional HIMSS, where hospital systems were sending, not just their CIO or CTO, but maybe their chief clinical nurses and other people in their IT department? Whereas ViVE, we all agree, was really C-level driven, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. I would say, ViVE brought in this kind of younger crowd, a lot of early stage folks, and then of course the CIOs, but, the CIO events were kind of separate from the actual exhibition hall. And I think they're working on that for next year to make sure that it's far more inclusive so that, both connect far more often. But, HIMSS had really kind of establishment ViVE, that more traditional, vibe, and, a slightly older population, and, hospital health system leaders, and just a ton of startups as well in the space, as well as some, industry veterans of sorts and vendors.
Yeah, I think Grace nailed it. On top of that, I walked around and said, and I asked some of the vendors, because at HIMSS, this year, normally we have a big booth, and we decided, in the sort of heat of the pandemic, that we were going to walk away from our big booth that was on the main strip at HIMSS. So we had a chance to walk around a little bit more and interact with some of our customers and potential customers and other vendors and so on. And I asked that exact question to folks who were in the booth who were interested in talking to CIOs, who those are, their main customers. And they said at HIMSS, and some of them were at both ViVE and HIMSS, and they said at ViVE, as Grace mentioned, those CIOs weren't really walking around the booths for the most part. They weren't involved in a lot of the events. However, at HIMSS, the numbers were lower, like the interaction levels were lower than they've seen in previous years. but they still had those types of folks coming around. And I saw some, some folks from the military health system and so on. Those are the kinds of people that you can, they're decorated, so that that's what they're doing. But I also saw, those sorts of names and folks on the badges. So I certainly had that. The numbers are probably down a little bit, but the establishment is there. There were certainly folks like that were coming around.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of percentages, it was probably about 60% vendors, maybe 30% hospital health system decision makers, maybe 8% consultants like myself and others who are kind of, in the consulting role, and then maybe 2% or so in media. And quite a few media decided to do the event virtually, and unfortunately had a really challenging time accessing the panels virtually, which is tricky because they were hoping, since there was a virtual option, it'd be easy to access the panels, but sometimes they wouldn't get it until the next day. And it was kind of a tricky thing for them. But the media that were in person said the panels were fantastic. They loved the patients that were included on the panels, which I think is something the patient advocacy community has been really pushing for many years. And they really did a great job including the patient voice on their panels. And I think that's something that ViVE can definitely learn from and do better in the future as well, with just really having those patient advocates, the patient voice and the caregiver voice included on these panels, talking about things in the industry.
Yeah, I think that certainly, again, paints the same picture that we all brought up a couple of weeks ago, which is that like ViVE network, conversational, very experiential. They're a lot of fun. I mean, there's fun always, but you know what I mean. They created that certain atmosphere, the music and the band and the let's all eat and drink together and just network. And HIMSS, very traditional education, certification, and that perhaps, as you guys have both pointed out, and Grace, what you're saying is, each conference could learn or expand in the other areas pocket, right? I mean, ViVE could get more educational, maybe they'll start, obviously the Chime folks, I'm sure, have a certification program for those CIOs that attend, I would think, but more that level to drive more of this, clinical staff that come from these hospital systems, and maybe HIMSS could, they probably were a little less, I don't want to say stodgy, that's the wrong word, traditional, right? But I can see what you mean, like the VA walking around, right?
Yeah.
And those numbers that you're talking about for HIMSS, obviously they had the four times the number of exhibitors, right? ViVE had about 250 or 260. I think HIMSS had about 1,000. So 4 times. And of course, the big EHRs like Epic, they bring a huge number of people to HIMSS and all of that. But what HIMSS this year didn't have, which it's had prior to the pandemic, leading up to 2019, of course, was that international factor, right? I mean, most of these people must have been, I would think, US.
No, there were certainly international people at HIMSS.
There were. Wow.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Some people brought their global delegations. I know, quite a few vendors
I did not know. That's fascinating.
Who have global delegations brought their global delegations, and HIMSS has their own global delegations that were meeting at the event. I know because I entered a few wrong rooms and heard things that I did not understand. But I knew it had to do with healthcare innovation, so that at least I had a frame of mind for what was happening.
So HIMSS in 2019 was the pinnacle of it. I was like, I don't remember. I'd have to go back look it up.
I think I saw numbers that were like 45,000.
Yeah, like 2019 was like 45, 46,000 altogether. You think this one was somewhere between 22 and 26?
That's what they're saying. Yeah. I mean, is it for there? Who knows? That's probably including digital. I'm not sure, but it's in the neighborhood probably. Yeah. Right, which is, if you compare to the numbers that ViVE was talking about 5,000. So that's a huge difference.
Yeah, I have to say, even though, it was a large event, but it wasn't like your elbows were against other elbows on the escalator and there was plenty of room to walk.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely HIMSS pre-COVID, like that.
Yes.
Remember those escalators, and you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I hope nobody falls." You know, it'd be like this domino effect, right?
So they definitely had room to walk. But I think it's really interesting that HIMSS is so good at fostering connectedness, even in that large kind of the larger numbers that they have. You know, really fostering conversations to happen and connectivity to happen in this kind of large event. And you could definitely see that at the HIMSS this year. You know, even though it was large and there were so many people, they fostered opportunities for people to come together and really meet up with folks that, Hit Like a Girl had a women's coffee, and there was close to 100 women there starting off the event. And, it was great to have that. And then other, women empowerment and health IT panels that brought women in the industry together to talk about things that are going on in the industry, patient panels to kind of bring those patients and caregivers and other patient advocates together to talk and network. And so I thought that was very fascinating and interesting that, HIMSS has really learned from the past and has really just opened up more doors for people to connect that have, topics and ideas that they could connect with each other on.
I would agree to a lot of that. I think that, there's no question that HIMSS, by sheer virtue of the fact that they're really getting everybody in the same place together, there's so many opportunities there. I mean, there was great opportunities for us as a business that were not available at ViVE. I do think, as you said, Carol, that there is plenty of opportunity for both conferences, A, to exist, but B, to learn from the things that the other one does well. Definitely, pardon me, the ability for ViVE to potentially add a whole bunch of educational tracks. I mean, ViVE only had, I think, 2, maybe 3 tracks going at a time for education. Yeah. And every single one of them was standing room only. They ended up getting really hot because you had way too many people in a room. So there's lots of opportunity for that to expand. But certainly, they did a really good job. And then when I say they, I mean ViVE, of taking care of everyone to keep that energy up. The whole, that salon area, massage area, for people, it never having a really nice podcast booth, lots of meeting areas, having events and all this that are dedicated, that are not just in a gigantic ballroom, and even those, really adding a lot of flavor and energy to them, all that kind of stuff. Those are things that HIMSS can learn from ViVE. So I think that there's plenty of room for both. And I think I suspect that ViVE will grow dramatically and take a bite out of HIMSS. But, if the both can learn from what they do well, I think we'll all benefit.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a place for both, similar to what James said, but I do think that it does a disservice to the industry to have them back to back the way that they did, because there's so much, so many wonderful conversations and things that can happen when there's, one event happening at a time where everybody could really focus their time and their energy. And so I think, having both events, fantastic. Maybe moving them apart slightly, a month or 2 or something, to make sure that folks have more opportunities to get together. I think that's the way to go, to kind of keep this unification in the industry so that people can really focus their time and energy on one event at a time, because both events are equally as critical and strategic in my mind if you're in digital health innovation.
I mean, I would say that it's nice in some ways to have them close, maybe not back to back. That was pretty rough on the body for I think many of us, but certainly having them close enough that you can use one to start a conversation maybe with somebody that you're you don't have a pre-existing relationship with, and then you have the opportunity to move the needle on that the next time you connect, which if it's a month down the road, that's pretty good. So I think I agree that maybe back to back, week to week is a little much, but certainly having them both within some kind of reasonable period of time would be good.
Yeah, that sort of though I guess presupposes that there's not a competition here, though, right? I mean, do you know what I mean? I think that I think I could be wrong, but it feels like a deliberate decision on the ViVE event to be the week before HIMSS. It's going to be the same next year, right? Because it does, again, I'm not obviously don't have a pipeline or, to the leadership of HIMSS or ViVE to ask that question. But
oh, I did ask that question though.
So that's what's happening, right? So like, so they're not going to say, oh, to benefit the industry on a whole, we're going to be 3 months apart so they can. It's the sales teams are vying for dollars from the vendors. They're competing for attendance. They're competing for sponsorships. And I mean, I think that you're right. ViVE will become more HIMSS-like, and HIMSS will become perhaps more ViVE-like. But really, at the end of the day, and it may never come to a knockdown, drag out, like knockout punch. But I think,
and you know what, the industry is big enough for both. It's a huge expanding industry. And I think depending on your strategic initiatives as a company, you can take a look at both and say both are here to stay and both have a really great stake in this industry. Do I want to, go to ViVE and have some great partnership conversations with other early startup vendors and other vendors around me and potentially meet some fantastic CIOs, or should I go to HIMSS and get that education, the certification, make some great connections, meet some hospital health system leaders in other areas of the hospital health system. And I do think that there's a big enough industry that both could still thrive.
James, you said you asked that question. Who did
I did ask that question. I asked that question to, I believe he's the founder and CEO of Health who put on ViVE, and what they said was that it was just a coincidence that was the week that they ended up getting, because these big venues that you have to book out for space and for hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff are not really available. It's almost impossible, and you have to book way in advance. Now, he said that with a smile, and I've heard him also speak about the vision of ViVE, and was very much kind of subtly jabbing at HIMSS when he was doing it, not so subtly jabbing at HIMSS when he was doing it. So do I believe that it was completely by accident that they ended up being back to back? Maybe not really, but maybe there's something to that. On the topic of having them both coexist, I think that having them kind of learn from each other, and having the competition there benefits us all that participate in this industry, because as we know, if you just have one player, they can get a little long in the tooth over time and potentially maybe take advantage where there is no other options. And so having both options for us as an industry, I think, is good. And, ViVE is certainly also more capital focused. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are startups there that are looking for money. And you don't really see that same level of investment presence at HIMSS. In fact, none of the investment people that I met at ViVE were at HIMSS. So it's a bit different that way as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did meet a few investors at after parties and things, but in terms of the panels too, and ViVE, I saw investors on a lot of the panels, and then on HIMSS, there weren't as many investors on panels. So you can see they're kind of catering to the audience that they have there.
There is a little bit of a break in 2023. So ViVE is going to be in Nashville, March 26th to the 29th, and HIMSS will be in Chicago, the 17th to the 21st of April.
Yeah, so there you go. There's a bit of a break. It's still quite close.
Yeah,
it is still really close. And again, that the other thing too, of course, is the health part of ViVE. They have their big conference in the fall, right? So it makes sense, if ViVE is health plus Chime. Chime has always had their CIO forum. I mean, they do a spring and a fall. They do a fall one too, but they do spring, and health has their event in their big event in the fall. So I mean, that also makes sense for them from a spring standpoint.
I have to
Right.
also say that ViVE is pretty lucky to have had Miami as their spot, because that's a fantastic place to have a trade show.
That was
Orlando is tricky. It's hard to navigate. I mean, there's a lot of families there for spring break. There's a lot of delays and cancellations and things that happen. And obviously Miami is a little bit more of a destination spot. So in terms of likability, I would say that that's exciting. Well, and I think next year, ViVE's going to be in Nashville and HIMSS is going to be in Chicago in the spring. Right, so you just never know. So you never know if maybe location might impact people as well in terms of where they'd like to go.
Well, I think
sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, I think too that, ViVE's selection, I mean, yes, Miami, Orlando and Miami being, so close, but, think about that city choice of Miami, right? And think about the city choice of Nashville, right? I mean, I think that's also part of their strategy as well. I mean, to be in McCormick Place in Chicago at HIMSS, I'm sorry. I mean, that's just a drag.
Yeah. Well, I hope that if the numbers, for HIMSS' sake, if the numbers stay where they are in that sort of 20 range, is it possible that they bring back some of the other venues that we have?
They sure.
San Diego and New Orleans and all that kind of stuff. They were much more, I think, interesting for people to
Austin,
Texas.
Yeah, let's go. Exactly.
Yeah.
I've heard that sentiment, James, actually from quite a few folks at HIMSS saying, actually, the size is fantastic. It's not so incredibly overwhelming, and yet it's large, and you have a lot of options, and there's a lot of people attending, and maybe this could mean new places and spots like we used to be able to go to that were fun.
You don't think that HIMSS is thinking, wow? I mean, think about what August we were all there in August in Las Vegas, right? Yeah. And we were like, oh gosh, this was, I mean.
Well, there was no way that they had more than 7,000 people.
Oh, that was and in a huge space. I mean, that was obviously not a very energetic conference, to say the least, right? But like, don't you think HIMSS perhaps is thinking, wow, we did this 6 months later. We can get back to this 40,000 plus level.
That's true. They did have to plan this event in 6 months, which is pretty amazing, and how well it went off without much of a problem is pretty amazing and incredible, and such a testament to their planners and their producers of that event. Yeah, so you're right, Carol. They have a year. Who knows what they can do with a year? And ViVE has a year too, and who knows what they can do with a year.
Well, and like you mentioned earlier, we also have, health in October, which, that's another one that I'm hearing more and more interested in. In fact, I was speaking to, I don't know, I don't want to put words in her mouth now, but I was speaking to someone who has an award ceremony that she puts together for excellence in the industry. And she was talking about potentially having that award ceremony at Health. And we're at Medicomp looking seriously into having a presence there as well. So now you have a third event that's starting to pick up steam as well, because it's on the sort of off season, not right in the middle of the HIMSS craziness. So I think that there's that there too.
That's really interesting, because health, of course, is much more of a diversified audience. You know what I mean? They, wearables and, I mean, again, heavy focus in on the, investor community and money and all that. I mean, health is a great event. I mean, the fact that they took the health approach and applied it to ViVE was very obvious, having gone to health. Yeah.
And two, I heard through the grapevine, and who knows if this is true, but I heard they're actually going to be working with Cirque du Soleil to help with the production of the event at ViVE in Las Vegas. Goodness. So
you mean health?
They're going to be putting their best foot forward. I mean, at the registration desk, there were puppies you could pet at Health last fall.
Yeah. You're right.
So I think they're going to put their best foot forward in terms of production.
Yeah. The health event will be in Vegas in October, and we cannot wait. As you know Roberta and I pretty well, and Vegas is our very favorite conference city. Well, as we wrap up here, just give me a couple takeaways from your 2-week road trip back-to-back conference experience.
I guess I can start first. For us, for Medicomp as a company, and we're a B2B company, both events for us were very successful. We made lots of connections, and having that energy up and seeing the sort of excitement in the industry, I think was very motivating for us and got our excitement up. And, we can tell that there's still lots to be done as an industry to move us all forward. And we're very happy to be part of this and very glad to be back.
Ah, yes. Grace.
Yes. And then from a PR perspective, our clients were thrilled. Their name recognition skyrocketed, from going to ViVE and going to HIMSS. They loved both events. And I think both events will be something that they will be planning to go to in the future. And then from a patient perspective, I was excited to see the patient voice really included in both events and amplified. And I look forward to seeing what the industry does in terms of, really improving that, patient advocate, patient and caregiver voice in these huge innovation conferences.
Yeah. Grace, James, again, just great chatting with you about both ViVE and now HIMSS. And, we'll have to do something after Health in October. How about that? We'll make it a plan at Health. We'll do an episode.
All right.
Sounds good to me. We always love talking with you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Carol.
You can learn more about James Aita at MedicompSystems.com and Grace Vinton at acmarketing.com. Be sure to follow them on Twitter at HealthTechJames and High Tea with Grace. Also, make sure you connect with them and follow them on LinkedIn. You can learn more about this show on the program page at healthcareNowRadio.com. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Carol Flagg or on LinkedIn. Have a topic or guest idea for this show? Send an email to carol@healthcareNowRadio.com. Until next time, I want to know, what's your tagline?